This week you're going to learn about the 4 first alphabetic filing rules. Before we talk about these first 4 rules, you need to learn the different terms that you'll be encountering throughout the rest of the semester. The first term here is indexing. And when I say indexing, I'm talking about the act of figuring out the name by which a record is going to be stored or filed. And so when you're determining this, you need to think about these things. What are you going to file the record under? And is the name a business name or a personal name? And so in this example on the right here, I have 2 BUSN 170 and then from Laura J. Huff. And so normally you would file something from a sender. So in this case, Laura J. Huff is a person's name, and we're going to file it under that name. And so the filing segment is the name or business that the record will be stored under. And again, that is Laura J. Huff. Okay. Indexing units are the different words that make up the filing segment. And so each word in the filing segment is considered a unit. And so Laura is a unit, J is a unit, and Huff is also a unit. You'll notice here that I'm not including the period after the J when I am indexing this. And you'll learn more why in a little bit. Another term that you'll be learning this week is the key unit. So the key unit is the first unit in a filing segment. And so this is going to be the first unit in this name that it will be filed under. Okay, and so with personal names, you normally file them by the last name first. And so that means that if we have something from Laura J. Huff, we would file that in an H folder under the last name Huff. The indexing order is the order in which each of these 3 units, in this case, are arranged. And so if we have a name such as Laura J. Huff, as I just mentioned, it would first be filed by her last name, and then her first name, and then her middle initial. Okay, and then finally we have coding. So coding is assigning a file designation to the records as they're classified. And it tells me to separate units by drawing slashes between each unit, underlining the key unit, and then numbering each successive unit. And so, again, if I have this indexing order for Laura J. Huff, it's going to be written as Huff, Laura J. My key unit, remember I identified that here. This is the name that it's going to be filed under. That's Huff. And now I'm going to separate each one of these 3 units with a slash. Okay, and it also tells me to number each successive unit. Okay, so Huff is my key unit, Laura is unit 2, and J is unit 3. So notice that I write the 2 above Laura, the 3 above J, and I don't put a 1 above Huff. Instead, to identify a key unit, I simply underline it. So the first rule in alphabetic filing deals with the indexing order of unit. And so that means that for personal names, you file first by last name. This is also known as the surname. Then the first name. And then if there's a middle initial or middle name, that would go last. Okay, so that's Rule 1A. Rule 1B deals with business names. And so business names are indexed as written. And so I'm just going to write business names. Index as written. Okay, so for these examples here, and this is also in your e-text, these examples. The first one is given to us. Okay, my key unit, so this is TDN Personnel Inc. This is a business name, and because it's a business name, T is my key unit, DN is unit 2, personnel is unit 3, and Inc. is unit 4. Okay, and then if we were to write this out, again, my key unit is T, DN is unit 2, personnel is 3, and Inc. is unit 4. And so for this one, we have Latasha Gregory. This is a personal name, and again, that means that I'm going to type in or write the last name first as a key unit. So Gregory is my key unit, and Latasha is unit 2. Okay, here we have another personal name. So Edward Simmons. Simmons is the last name. That means that's my key unit. And Edward is unit 2. Okay, here we have Greg Simmons Car Company. So even though there's a person's name in the business name, it's still a business name. And because it's a business name, we look at Rule 1B. And that means that we're going to index it as it's written. Greg is my key unit. Simmons is my unit 2. Car is unit 3. Company is unit 4. And so I can write that here as well. Same thing for this one. We have Albert Brown Suit Shop. Just because there's someone's name in here doesn't mean that we're going to file it first by the last name. This is a business name, and so I'm going to index it exactly how it's written. Straight across, Albert is my key unit, Brown is unit 2, Suit is unit 3, and Shop is unit 4. The next one is Albert. So here we're assuming that Albert is the person's first name and Albert is their last name. Because this is a personal name, we would file it by the last name first as the key unit, and Albert would be unit 2. Okay, here we have TDN. This is somebody's name. So DN is my key unit, and T is unit 2. Okay, and here we have TF Simmons. There is a space between the period and the F and between the period and the S here. So this is still a person's name, but because there are spaces between this space and the F, each one of these is a separate unit. Okay, so my key unit is Simmons. Unit 2 would be the T, and F is my unit 3. Okay, next we have DN Dry Cleaners. This is a business name, so I'm going to index it straight across. DN is my key unit. Dry is unit 2. Cleaners is Unit 3. And then finally we have Anna C. DN. DN is my key unit because this is a person's name. Anna is Unit 2. And the letter C is my Unit 3. Okay, and next you'll see why we separate these into different units. And so if we're given all of these names, and we want to put them in order, so number 1 would be the record or the name that's going to be filed first in a folder or a filing cabinet. And so this will be in alphabetical order. And so when I'm looking at the key unit, I want to see what letter would come first. In that case, we have A for Albert, and there's no other A's. And so because we have two Alberts here as a key unit, to figure out which one is going to be filed first, we then need to look at Unit 2. Okay, so of these two names, I want to see, does B come before E, which it does, and so Albert Brown Suit Shop is going to be filed first. Okay, and then Albert. Next, I'll see what's going to be filed after the key unit Albert. So I need to go mentally through the alphabet. The next letter in my key unit list would be D. So we have 3 different DNs. So I'm going to look at Unit 2 to see which one would be filed first. And it looks like I have A for Anna, D for Dry, and T for Tie. Okay, so in this case, the DN with Anna C or Anna C DN would be filed next. Because the D comes before the T in the alphabet, D and Dry Cleaners would be filed, and then D and T. The next letter, looking at the key unit, would be the G's. So we have Greg and Gregory. And so you'll learn that there's a rule called nothing before something. And in this case, we have Greg, and that just ends, and then we have Gregory. So we call this thing, or this space after Greg, nothing, and there's something here. So Greg is going to be filed before Gregory. So that would be 6, and then 7. We have 2 Simmons, so I'm then going to need to look at my Unit 2. We have an Edward Simmons and then a T Simmons. So the E in Edward tells me that that's going to be filed before the T.F. Simmons name. And then don't forget, even though this was an example, we can still include this TDN Personnel Inc. Okay, and so this order just tells me the order in which I would have filed each of these names in a folder or a filing cabinet. So Rule 2 deals with minor words and symbols in business names. So articles, prepositions, and symbols are considered separate indexing units. Okay. One more thing to note is that when the word the, such as here, the chimney sweepers and the crazy fox, okay, the will be, again, the last unit. So for the filing segment, the chimney sweepers, chimney is my key unit, sweepers is Unit 2, and the is Unit 3. Okay, and this makes filing a lot easier, especially because there are many different business names that actually begin with the word the. And if you were to file all of those business names, it would be very difficult to find the exact business name that you want. And so with the crazy fox, again, it's a business name, so I'm indexing it as it's written. Because it begins with the word the, that's going to be filed last. Crazy is my key unit, fox is Unit 2, and the is Unit 3. So crazy, fox, the. Okay, here we have a shop of wonders. So I'm separating each of those. A is my key unit, shop is unit 2, of is 3, and wonders is unit 4. Next, we have an honorable store. So an is my key unit, honorable is unit 2, store is unit 3. Next, we have C and R offerings. Remember what I said about symbols, that they need to be written out. So there was a space between the C and the and symbol and the N and the R symbol. So I am going to separate them. So my key unit is C, and is unit 2. And so it's really important that you spell it out when you have to write this. Okay, so that means that R is going to be unit 3, and offerings is unit 4. Okay, here we have camp by the sea. Camp is my key unit, by is unit 2, the is unit 3, and C is unit 4. Okay, here we have C and R company. Again, I'm going to need to spell out the and. So my key unit is C, and is unit 2, R is unit 3, and company is unit 4. We have the clip joint. Remember, rule 2 also states that if a business name begins with the word the, that's going to be our last unit. So clip is my key unit, joint is unit 2, and the is unit 3. Next, we have a $, Saver Cleaners. And in this case, the $, is going to be our key unit. And we're going to write that out as $. My unit 2 is Saver. And unit 3 is Cleaners. Okay, and finally, we have CyberSurf by the hour. CyberSurf is my key unit, by is unit 2, the is unit 3, hour is unit 4. Just making sure that it's written without any spaces. Okay, and that's the gist of rule number 2. Rule number 3 now deals with punctuation and possessives. So all punctuation is going to be disregarded when you're indexing personal and business names. So that means that commas, periods, hyphens, apostrophes, dashes, exclamation points, and question marks, quotation marks, these are all going to be disregarded. Okay, but the names will still be indexed as written. So if we have in and out car wash, you'll notice that there are dashes between the word in and also between the and the out. Because there's no actual space between these, in and out is going to be an entire unit. And so because this is a business name, I'm going to index it as in and out as my key unit. Car is unit 2, wash is unit 3. So when I write this in my key unit, I'm not writing any spaces between the words in and out. Okay, again, unit 2 would be car, and unit 3 is wash. Okay, here we have Imelda Irving Brown. So this is a personal name with a hyphen. Remember, with personal names, the last names are indexed first, and then the first name. So my key unit is going to be Irving Brown without any space between the G and the B. Okay, and unit 2 is Imelda. Okay, here I have the Flying Cow Dairy. There's nothing new for this rule. Just remember rule 2, which states that we have to put the word the at the end. So if I separate these, flying is my key unit, cow is unit 2, dairy is unit 3, and the is unit 4. Next we have inside-outside games. There's a comma, ink with a period. So again, I'm going to disregard this slash here. There's no space between the E and the slash or the slash and the O. So this entire thing is my key unit, and then games, and then ink. Okay, so that is inside, outside as my key unit. And let me delete this thing that appeared. Games is unit 2. Again, I'm not including the comma after games, nor am I going to include the period after ink. Okay, for the next one we have a symbol. Okay, and it's really important that you read through the business name so that you write it out correctly. So it could either be pounds or it could be numbers. And so if you read it, we have the number sign away diet center. So numbers away diet center doesn't make sense, but pounds away diet center does. So this sign or symbol is a pound sign. And so notice there's also an S directly after that symbol. So my key unit is pounds, unit 2 is away, diet is unit 3, and center is unit 4. Okay, next I have the Inkadoo stamp store. Let's separate these. There's no space between the dash and the words here. So Inkadoo is 1 unit. That's also my key unit because this begins with the word the. So Inkadoo, no spaces between these words. Stamp store, and then finally unit 4 is the word the. Next we have a dollar sign. Okay, and so when I separate this, remember we have to write out the symbol name. So dollar, saver, store. Okay, and before I forget, I'll just finish writing the unit numbers. For in-town couriers, again, there's no space between the dash and the words. So in-town is 1 unit, couriers is another unit. So in-town, no space between these two words, couriers. Okay, here we have another personal name, Allison Love Jarvis. Okay, so Love Jarvis is going to be my key unit because this is a personal name. And Allison is unit 2. Okay, finally we have Lovely and Ripley Clothing. This is a business name, so I'm indexing this as written. And then when I write it out, I'm going to write out the and symbol. So my key unit is Lovely. Unit 2 is the word and. Ripley is unit 3. And clothing is unit 4. Next, I can practice putting this in order. So let's look at the key units and see what would be filed first. So if I look through here, the D would be the first letter that I would file by. So that would be 1. Okay, next we have the F. Okay, and then the next letter in the alphabet, according to these key units that I have, would be I. So there are a lot of I's, and so I'm going to need to look at the second letter in these key units. So I have an IN and IR, another IN, another IN, okay, and another IN. So I had a few INs, I think about 4. So I'm going to then need to look at the third letter in the key unit. So INT, I have an INK, an INS, and an INA. In this case, the INA would be filed before. Okay, next, again, here's an INS, an INK, and an INT. So ink would be next for Inkado. Okay, next would be inside outside because the INS is before INT. Okay, after I, we then have, whoops, I'm sorry, there's one more I, there's an Irving Brown. So that would be 7, that's an IRV. Okay, after that we have the L's. So we have Lovely and Love Jarvis. So notice that both of these names have love. So I need to look at the next letter. And J does come before L, so Love Jarvis will be filed before Lovely. And then finally we have Pounds Away Diet Center. The fourth rule deals with single letters and abbreviations. So initials and personal names are considered separate indexing units. Okay, also abbreviations of some names and nicknames are also indexed as they're written. Okay, as for business names, such as ICA Corp, if there's a space between them, they're going to be separate units. So let's take a look at this first example, that is Idea Corporate Services. Even though it's all in caps, there is no space between these letters. So Idea is 1 unit, then Corporate, and then Services. Here we have I Can Fix It Auto Body. Again, there's only dashes and no spaces. So I Can Fix It is an entire unit. It's also my key unit. Auto is unit 2, body would be unit 3. And again, notice that I'm not putting any spaces when I write this out. And let me just fix this here. Okay, notice that I'm also matching the case. So I write the I in capitals, the C in capitals, the F in capitals, and also the I. Okay, and that even goes the same for this. Notice that I always capitalize it exactly how it's written in my filing segment. For ICA Corp, there are spaces, so each is a separate unit. So here my key unit is I, C is unit 2, A is unit 3, and Corp is unit 4. Here we have I Digit Services. There are spaces, so each one is a separate unit. Here we have I Am Woman Inc. Let's separate these. I is my key unit, 2 is unit 2, Am is unit 2, Woman is unit 3, Inc is unit 4. here we have I see clearly vision. There is a space between these, so they are separate units. I would be my key unit, C is unit 2, clearly is unit 3, and finally vision is unit 4. Next we have I buy antiques. Let's separate these out. I is my key unit, buy is unit 2, and antiques is unit 3. Here we have I cap ink. Notice there are no spaces between the letters, so that is 1 unit. Here we have ID Booth ink. ID is my key unit, Booth is unit 2, ink is unit 3. The last one that we have is IBT Associates. There's no space, so IBT is an entire unit, and Associates is unit 2. Okay, notice that I do spell the entire thing out, I don't abbreviate it. Okay, so let's try to put this in order. All of our key units begin with an I, and so remember that nothing before something rule I mentioned. And because of this nothing before something rule, that means that all of these 5 I's would be filed first. Because they're just single I's, I'll then need to look at unit 2. If I look at unit 2, the A and M would be filed first, so that would be first. And then I have a B for buy, so that would be next. Then I have 2 C's here. Because they match, I then need to look at unit 3. So the A in ICA Corp would be filed before the C in I See Clearly Vision. Okay. And then the next I is the I Dig It Services, because we have a D. That would be 5. Okay, now I'll go back to my key units and see what would be filed next. So if I look at the second letters in my key units, I have an ID, an IC, another IC, ID, and an IB. So the B comes before the C or the D, so that would be filed next. Okay, and I did have 2 ICs. I have an ICAP and an ICAN. Okay, and an N in the alphabet is before the P. So I Can Fix It would be filed before ICAP. And then for the last 2, we have ID Booth Inc. and IDEA. Again, we have this nothing before something rule, so that means that ID would be filed before IDEA. So that's number 10. Some records of people's or businesses might be requested by names that are different from the ones which they're stored or filed under. And so this usually happens when the key unit is hard to figure out. And so when a record is likely to be requested by more than one name, we use what's called a cross-reference. So a cross-reference shows the name in a form other than what's used to file it in the original record. And so let's say that we have the name Charles David. And so in this case, we would use a cross-reference because this is an unusual name or an easily confused name. Okay, and that's because you might think that this person's first name is David, when in fact it is actually Charles. So when we code the original filing segment, we code it as a last name first, David, and then Charles is unit 2. When you create a cross-reference, it's usually on a separate piece of paper or an index card, depending on how you file your records. And so your cross-reference is the other way that it could have been filed under. And so, as an example, another way that this could have been filed would have been under Charles as my key unit, and then David as unit 2. Also on a cross-reference card, on the bottom of that, you would refer to the original filing segment. So I would write a little notation that says C. David Charles. And so you'll notice that, again, I wrote David Charles because David was my original key unit and Charles was my original unit 2. Okay, but you don't need to put your slashes in the C notation, only in the main part of the cross-reference. Okay. Another instance in which you would use a cross-reference or create a cross-reference is for foreign names. And so here we have Akeo Saga. And here we would assume that this is a person's name. Thus, Saga is the key unit in the original filing segment, and Akeo is unit 2. When I create the cross-reference for this, I would write Akeo here as my key unit and Saga as unit 2. Okay, and just like the previous example here, I'd still need to create a C notation. So I would refer them back to the original file, which would be C Saga, because that's my original key unit, Akeo. Okay, sometimes for business names, you have compound names. So that's a compound name is when a business name includes 2 or more individual last names. And so here we have Jarvis, Rasmussen, and Sheridan Antiques. Our original filing segment would be Jarvis, Rasmussen, and Sheridan Antiques. That'd be 2, 3, 4, and 5. So when we create a cross-reference, and notice that I have 2 cross-reference boxes indicating that I need to create 2 different cross-references for this one business name. My first cross-reference is going to be the second name. So I already have one under Jarvis, so my next one would be Rasmussen. Okay. And I'm going to ignore this and. I'm going to assume that it's going to be a comma Sheridan. Okay, and then I would put in the third name. So Rasmussen, Sheridan, and Jarvis. So notice that I'm going in this order. So I'm going straight around or straight across, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning. So Rasmussen, Sheridan, and Jarvis Antiques. My C notation would be the original, which is Jarvis, Rasmussen, and Sheridan Antiques. Ran out of room here. And so my next cross-reference, let me delete this, is going to start with the third name. And that way when we file this, we'll have one under the J for Jarvis, a cross-reference under the R for Rasmussen, and then the Sheridan in our A file. That way, if we only know one last name in this business, we'll still be able to figure out or find this record. So this is going to be Sheridan, and then I start all the way at the beginning again. So I'm not going to do Sheridan, Rasmussen, then Jarvis. I'm going to do Sheridan, Jarvis, Rasmussen. And again, I ran out of room, but that's okay. And my C notation would be to my original filing segment. So it's going to be the same thing as it is on the left, which is C, Jarvis, Rasmussen, and Sheridan, Antiques. And so again, to reiterate, using these cross-references helps us find the records if you only know part of the name or one of these names listed. So the final instance this week that you'll learn cross-references is going to be for hyphenated surnames. So usually married women sometimes use hyphenated surnames. And with hyphenated surnames, a request for records could be in either of these surnames. And so we do need to create a cross-reference for this. So if our original filing segment was Wendy Reardon Bruss, I would separate the first and last name. There's no space between the dash here. So Reardon Bruss is my original key unit, and Wendy is unit 2. So when I create my cross-reference card, I'm going to use the second surname as my key unit, which is Bruss, and then her first name, and then the first half of her original last name. So Bruss, Wendy, Reardon. So Bruss is my key unit, Wendy is unit 2, and Reardon is unit 3. Finally, my C notation would refer me back to the original file, which would be C, Reardon Bruss, I'm not going to put a space between the N and the B in Bruss. Let me rewrite that. Okay. And then I have Wendy. So I also want to go over abbreviations and acronyms. So when a business is commonly known by an abbreviation or an acronym, we create a cross-reference for the full name. So for this example, we have Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which is MAD. And so my original filing segment is simply MAD. When I create my cross-reference card, I'm going to do Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They will code this, so Mothers is my key unit, Against is unit 2, Drunk is unit 3, Driving is unit 4. Don't forget to create your C notation at the bottom. And that's going to be C, the original filing segment, which is MADD. For this next one, we have Easy Electronics, which is also known as Ewan and Zucker Electronics. So in this case, my original filing segment that it's going to be filed under is EZ as my key unit and Electronics as Unit 2. So my cross-reference is going to be Ewan and Zucker Electronics. And my C notation will refer me back to the original, which is CEZ Electronics. Notice that I have another cross-reference card on the right, and that's because in addition, this Ewan and Zucker Electronics is a compound name. So we have Ewan and Zucker Electronics as my first cross-reference. My second cross-reference would need to be Zucker and Ewan Electronics. So remember, whenever you have two or more last names in a business name, such as this, you have to create a cross-reference. Okay. And then my C notation would refer me back to the original, which is CEZ Electronics. And for good measure, I will separate these. Ewan is my key unit, and is Unit 2. Zucker is Unit 3. Electronics is Unit 4. And for my second cross-reference, Zucker is my key unit, and is Unit 2. Ewan is Unit 3. And Electronics is Unit 4. In this final practice, let's see which of these filing segments need cross-references. So the first one we have is WKKP radio station. Okay, we actually do not need a cross-reference for this, as it would simply be filed under WKKP radio station. Here we have IBM International Business Machines. In this case, we do have a business name in parentheses, which tells me that that's the other name for this business. So my original filing segment would be under IBM. The cross-reference would be for International Business Machines. With International as my key unit, Business as Unit 2, and Machines as Unit 3. My C notation would be C IBM. For this next one, we have Sedaris and Shattuck Company. So there are two names in here. So that tells me that I will need to create a cross-reference for this. So if my original is Sedaris and Shattuck Company, my cross-reference is going to be Shattuck and Sedaris Company. And my C notation would be C Sedaris and Shattuck Company. Next we have Platika and Miller Investment Firm. So there are two last names here. My original filing segment would include Platika as my key unit and as Unit 2, Miller Unit 3, Investment as Unit 4, and Firm as Unit 5. So my cross-reference would then be Miller and Platika Investment Firm. And we would do C Platika and Miller Investment Firm. Okay, here we have Joan Childress Edwards. This is a hyphenated surname. So Childress Edwards would be the original key unit, and Joan would be unit 2. Okay, a cross-reference is needed for this, and it would be filed under Edwards as the key unit, Joan as unit 2, and Childress as unit 3. And so my C notation would be C, Childress Edwards, with no space between these two last names, and then Joan. Okay, here we have the Riverside Terrace. This does not need any cross-reference. Okay, here we have Akeo Saga. Recall that this was one of the first examples that I showed you. So even though we do live in Hawaii and we're kind of used to having, Japanese, Chinese, Korean last names, we might be used to that. But in the mainland, people might not be able to determine the first and the last name. So we would still need to create a cross-reference. Our original would be filed under Saga and then Akeo. And our cross-reference card would be Akeo Saga, with Akeo as my key unit, Saga as unit 2, and then C, Saga, Akeo. Okay. We don't need to do a cross-reference for Maurick's Diner, but for this one we have Smith, Childers, and Jones, Inc. So this is a compound business name. Our original would be filed under Smith. Key unit is Childers. We have and, then Jones, and then Inc. So our first cross-reference, and I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit bigger because I will need to create 2, is going to start with Childers. Okay, I'll go to the next name, which is Jones, and Smith, Inc. My C notation would be C, Smith, Childers, and Jones, Inc. Okay, my second cross-reference would start with Jones. Okay, I'll then go back to the beginning. So Jones, Smith, and Childers. Inc. My C notation is C, Smith, Childers, and Jones, Inc. It's always going to be the original filing segment, even if you have multiple. Finally, we have BBCC, which stands for Big Bend Community College. Our original filing segment would be BBCC. My cross-reference would be for Big Bend Community College. So Big is my key unit, Bend is unit 2, Community is unit 3, College is unit 4. My C notation would be C, BB, CC. Okay, and before I forget, I'll also separate these. So these were our cross-references. So hopefully the rules were pretty easy to grasp. For most students, I think the cross-references are the most difficult concept to understand. So just practice them, read through the textbook regarding the cross-references as much as you need to, so that you do understand them.